Red shift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Okay, so this is going to be the first part of my video that is going to be, of my script, that is responding to a video that Square.Peg made about me, and it was about an hour long. So while I was watching his hour-long video a long time ago, I took a bunch of notes with my voice recorder, and then I made this huge long script translated from transcribed from the voice notes. And I've tried to pare it down, but I just really can't pare it down much more. It just really is about 3 hours long. So I'm going to have to break it up into 3 videos, and each is going to be an hour long. So yeah, here we go. I want to address the so-called rebuttal made by Square.Peg. He seems to say some things he hasn't said before, and so I'll respond again to what he's saying. He asserted that killing yourself and killing other people are separate things, so just because you're going to kill yourself doesn't make what you're doing to other people brave. Okay, yes, in a sense he's right, but this totally excludes the culpability of the sheeple. Number one, most sheeple are hedonistic, apathetic, they don't care that their tax dollars are funding genocide, and even if they do care, they're not willing to do anything to stop it. And this is how it is. It's completely unconscionable, completely untenable, and therefore most sheeple deserve to be forcibly exsanguinated. These people believe in government, therefore they believe in government having the right to force you with guns to pay taxes. They support theft. Taxation is theft. If someone breaks into your house to rob you, then you're legally justified in shooting the thief. How is this any different? If people are allowing government the power of being funded and are giving government the illusory patina of legitimacy, which it then uses to steal from other people who do not want to be stolen from, then these people are no different than a thief breaking into your house. They deserve to die because they are statists. Statists are oppressing non-statists and everybody else. They're oppressing each other as well, such as statists who don't believe in funding war. The statists who don't care about, the government funding war, they're oppressing the statists who are statists, but they don't believe in war. So sheeple are absolutely culpable in everything that the government does, including the genocide that happened in Iraq over the last 18 years, or 17 years, and elsewhere. These sheeple, they're still paying their taxes. They're not refusing to pay taxes out of a sense of morality. They know their taxes are used for genocide, and they still pay taxes. So sheeple do have blood on their hands. They're not innocent victims. And even if they were, like if the next Terrant or Crucius shoots up a kindergarten, if you're a statist, you're being utterly hypocritical, Because all modern statism assumes the government is a legitimate thing, and therefore the government's rationale for war is justified, and the rationale is, we have to kill a shitload of people so that even more lives can be saved. We have to drop a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to save even more lives. American troops' lives. It's unfortunate, but we got to do it. That's the rationale for war, right? That's the rationale. Well, that's the exact same rationale used by people like Terrant and Crucius. They say, well, I'd much rather not go on a spree because I'm not a sadist, but I kind of have to because there's no way we're going to wake the people up if we don't do stuff like this. So, they do it in order to save more lives than they take, in order to regain freedom. It's the same logic. Read Crucius's final words before he did what he did. It's only 3.5 pages. It's a super easy read, and he's basically right about everything he said. Obviously, I think he should have said a lot of things in there that he never even mentioned, like the petrodollar and stuff. But, everything he did say, basically everything. I think I only disagreed with one little tiny thing he said, but basically he's right about everything. He's a smart guy. He knows what's going on. These people like Crucius and Terrant are not sadists. They're not idiots. They're not losers. What they do is necessary. These sprees, these spree people are using the exact same rationale the government is using to justify its wars. And that rationale actually is a good one. It doesn't justify government, but it is a logical rationale. If you have to kill one person to save 100, that's logical. That's moral. The government uses that logic, though, as merely a pretext. The government's not trying to save lives. The government's trying to make money and increase power. That's it. But people like Crucius and Terrant are not using that rationale as a pretext. They are actually trying to save lives and preserve freedom. So if you believe in government of any kind, then you should support what Crucius and Terrant did even more. Now, Square.Peg claims to be an anarchist, but if you listen to his video criticizing me, then you can tell that he seems to be actually not an anarchist after all. And as far as a blue-pilled mating strategy, he claims that, going on a spree is a blue-pilled mating strategy. That is utterly retarded. I said I'm not approving of MGTOW men going on sprees. I'm approving of people who have nothing to lose going on sprees. Besides, I've already rebutted this idea of male disposability. It's ridiculous. Males will always be disposable. So are you going to be disposable in a good way, or are you going to be disposable in a bad way? That's the only question. Are you going to support the disposability of other men who are less smart than you, less successful than you, because of our tyrannical system, because you don't want to fight to overthrow it? Or are you going to fight, or are you going to support the disposability of good people, as good people with principles fight to overthrow the government so we can all have freedom, prosperity, peace, a sane sexual marketplace, a moral culture, etc.? In other words, are you going to support the screwing over of the bottom 80 or 99% of people, and make them disposable that way? Or are you going to support male disposability in the sense of, we have to fight and some of us are going to lose our lives, but, we'll get freedom back and that's worth it. You can either have a good male disposability or bad male disposability. Are you going to be disposable by fighting for a sane society so we can get a sane society again by overthrowing the government? Or are you going to favor male disposability in the sense of, well, I'm a top man, I have good genes, I can make a decent amount of money, I can get women, etc., so my life is good, so I'm going to say, fuck those incels, I don't really care about them, I'm not going to do anything to benefit their lives. And MGTOW really does do nothing to benefit incels, that's undeniable. And as far as the blue pill mating strategy goes, he claims that these men have the genes of suicide, so therefore these are not good genes to pass on. This is bullshit. If you're principled enough, like Crucius or Tarrant, principled enough to go on a spree over injustice, those are genes of wisdom. These are genes of high intelligence. Those are genes of morality, of principledness. These are the genes that are willing to sacrifice themselves to make the world a better place for other people. For other people. In other words, benevolence. And if everybody had those genes, then nobody would have to sacrifice themselves to make the world a better place. And that's how it used to be. Most Americans in the past were like that. Like in that movie Legends of the Fall. The father doesn't want his son going to war, but his son's like, he didn't say this literally, but this is basically what he was saying. He was saying this is a pivotal time in human history. We have to do something. We have a moral obligation to join the fight. And then he ends up saying near the end to his fiance, he says, it's the only honorable thing to do. Right? His father was not too keen on him going to war, right? But that's how people used to be in the past. They felt a duty to fight and even risk their lives fighting for, and even die, fighting for things like freedom, peace, justice, etc. This is how it was. So if everybody, once again, like in the past, had the genes of quote-unquote suicidalness, that is self-sacrificiality over principles, in other words, non-selfishness, if everybody had those genes of willing to sacrifice their own life for other people, for freedom and stuff, then the world would be a way, way better place if everybody had those genes like they used to in the past, right? It's not like he's doing it out of an attitude of like, well, I'm unhappy, so I'm going to go on a spree. It's more like, he's looking at the world, he's like, this is all fucked up, we got to do something about this system. And then he does what it takes, and he dies fighting for principles. That's what Tarrant and Crucius did, and that's a good thing. Dying for principles are the genes that you want to be passed on. What do you want? Cowardly genes to be passed on? You want the genes of people who don't give a fuck about society to be passed on? You want the genes of people who, don't give a fuck about other people to be passed on? The genes of dying for principles, those are good genes. Not the genes of like, I'm going to just divest and live my happy, comfortable MGTOW lifestyle. Fuck everybody else below me. I don't care about them. I'm going to go my own way. And MGTOW doesn't require me to have any feelings or responsibility toward all these other people who are below me. So fuck them. What kind of genes are those? Those are selfish genes. Those are the really bad genes. Those selfish genes are what got us into this gynocentric and enslaved mess in the first place. That very attitude is the very attitude that led men to start being promiscuous in the 60s that started this whole mess. It was male promiscuity that caused the gynocentrism in the first place. So it's that very attitude that actually caused the gynocentrism. That's why we're in the mess we're in. Because of that attitude, And that attitude, those are genes of weakness and cowardice. Just you wanting to live your happy life and fuck everybody else. Those are genes of like, I'm going to survive no matter what. No matter how much I'm funding the evil system by continuing to pay taxes. No matter how much it hurts other people, I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to survive no matter what. Fuck everybody else. What kind of genes are those? Those are cowardly, weak, evil genes. Those are not good genes. Most MGTOW genes are not the kind of genes that should be passed on. At least all the MGTOWs who have that kind of attitude should not be passing on their genes. The Crucius, Tarrant, Ogdom genes, the Snowden genes, the Zeitgeist Eater genes, these are the genes that should be propagated. Because like I said, if everybody had those self-sacrificial, principled, moral, brave genes, then we would be living in a fair, free, sane, peaceful society, and then nobody would have to go on a spree, because everybody would be principled enough and brave enough to stand up and oppose tyranny when it even just got started rearing its ugly head, much less get out of control like it is today. And as far as being a blue-pilled mating strategy, he says it's deceitful to trick women into mating this way. When I suggested that, like, men who are going to go on a spree could save their sperm beforehand and then give it to a friend, frozen, and then have their friend store it in his freezer and then sell it online after he goes on the spree. And then women would want those brave genes. That's what I said in a past video, right? And then he says this is deceitful to trick women into mating this way. What are women using against men? Women have been using deceit against men for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And MGTOW men complain about it. So what? We're not supposed to use deceit back? Not to mention it's not deceitful, because like I said, these guys are principled. These guys are smart enough to know what's going on. That's why they're pissed off. So yeah, these guys should be passing on their genes. So how is it deceitful? These guys like Terrence and Crucius are pissed off because they're smart. They know what's going on. Unlike all the sheeple who turn a blind eye to what's going on. But Terrence and Crucius see very clearly what's going on because they're smarter than average. And guys like Terrence could live a decent life, but they want to do the right thing and make a statement. Especially considering there won't be a world worth living in if they don't make a statement and turn this thing around. Do their part to turn this thing around. Save humanity. I mean, who wants to live in a horrific, hellish neo-dystopia like 1984? That's what we're headed toward. We're basically there already, but it's only going to get way, 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 way worse. Even if you're a top 20% guy, it'll be hellish. It'll be 1984 on steroids. It'll be like 1984, but even worse. So these guys, by going out in a spree, are waking the sheeple up. They're making a point, they're freeing themselves from the tyranny of the future, tyranny that will arise if they do nothing, and they're taking the risk of maybe getting captured or thrown in prison for the rest of their life, where they could be raped over and over again by men for decades, even though these men who are doing this are straight. So they are taking a huge risk by going on a spree. They're risking a lifetime of rape if they're captured, instead of, able to kill themselves before they get captured. So, it's no guarantee they're going to be able to kill themselves before they get arrested. Both Crucius and Manassian were captured. Going on a spree is a major risk. They're doing it because they're smart enough to see the encroaching tyranny, and they're compassionate enough to be angry about it, because it's horrific. The legal misandry, the NSA surveillance, the environmental destruction, the propaganda, the debt slavery, the endless war, it's all horrific. So to just turn a blind eye to that, or to just try to live your happy, free MGTOW lifestyle, despite the horror going on, is utterly disgusting. I mean, horror, H-O-R-R-O-R, is a word that doesn't even come close to encompassing it. And I'm not even advocating the MGTOW men go on sprees. I'm advocating for those who have no reason to live to go on sprees. Because if life is just as bad as death, then why should you go online and just whine about being an incel like a lot of incels do, when you could instead go on a spree and make the world a better place by waking people up to the problems so that something improves. You can get women to cave by scaring the shit out of them. And why shouldn't you? Because women are acting totally entitled. They're not taking account of the fact that men are being peaceful toward them when men do not have to be peaceful toward women. Men could go absolutely apeshit and forcibly violate and or forcibly exsanguinate as many women as they want. Every man in society could forcibly exsanguinate every woman in sight. Men don't have to be peaceful. So incels should withdraw their peacefulness because they have no reason to live. They're not getting to have kids. They're not getting love. They're not even getting sex. And I mean the financialization and all the rest of it. He implies that they're just losing at the game of life, so they're being petty little bitches by going on sprees. Give me a fucking break. Come on. Financialization has completely financially raped the bottom 99% of people, or at least the bottom 90% of people. I mean, even the middle class, those who are living okay middle class lives are getting screwed over hardcore. I mean, just because they seem to be doing okay doesn't mean that they would not be doing infinitely better if there were no financialization, no QE, no Wall Street, if Wall Street were being held accountable, if CIA were not colluding with the banks behind the scenes, etc., etc. So it's totally insane to act like incels are just losers who are just doing a petty thing to try to gain access to women. Square.Peg's position is utterly ridiculous because most of today's incels would not have been incels 100 years ago. Most of these guys are normal guys who are cut out of the sexual dating market because of women's entitlement, misandric laws, male promiscuity, the simps who date and marry non-virgins, and the bottom 80% of men who are cowardly allowing the top 20% of men to ruin all the women by having sex with them and taking all their pair-bonding ability. And the cowardice of the bottom 80% of men therefore makes them complicit in the destruction of women and complicit in the disenfranchisement of incels. So it's a case of, like, if we had the society that we had 100 years ago, there's no way in hell that these guys would be incels. And so to act like they're just, petty little bitch losers is ridiculous. These are normal guys, and they're being disenfranchised by financial shenanigans, lack of morality in society, etc. They know they're being robbed, and they're angry about it, because if they had been born 100 years earlier, they would be living a nice middle-class life. They would have had no problem getting a wife. They would have had no problem having kids. They'd be living a nice middle-class life, and everything would be good. But today, the government and the multi-tap, and it's not even just an IQ issue. Like, you could say, well, things have changed. Population has gone up. It's a situation where, you need a higher IQ these days. And so these incels, It's nobody's fault that they can't get a woman because they can't get a good job because you don't have a high IQ. You know, you could say that, but that's not accurate either, because, you know, if you're falling below the ability to provide for wife and kids financial threshold because of taxation and women being in the workforce because of the propaganda in the multinational corporations promoting Xers to be in the workforce, then you are actually making it so that the guy can't get sex, can't get love, can't get anything, right? Like, yeah, maybe he'd have a crappy job and maybe probably still be a bottom 30% guy, even if, you know, we had no government, we lived in an ANCAP country, but there'd be no taxation, hardly any Xers would be in the workforce, etc. And so it'd be a situation of like, yeah, he's still a 3 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 or whatever, but he can get a wife and kids because he can make enough money to support a wife and kids. You see? So you can't, like, you know, put the blame on the evolution of humanity and take it off government or anything like that. Now, I'm not saying, like, Square.Peg was doing that, but I am attacking him for, you know, acting like, you know, it's the incels' fault or something, or like they're just losers or whatever. That's fucking ridiculous. It's a tyranny issue. Come on, like, how gynocentric are you that you're gonna, like, fucking blame men when it's the government's fault? It's fucking ridiculous. And then, like I said, you know, they'd be living a middle-class life and everything would be good if we were under ANCAP, right? These incels would. Sure, they'd still be bottom 30% guys or whatever, but they'd be having a good life. You know, but today, the government and the multinational corporations are tyrannical. And the top 5% or 5 to 15% of men, the top 5 to 15% of men are totally psychotic, psychopathic, promiscuous, degenerate scumbags, and the bottom 99% of men are just letting them get away with their bad behavior. So to criticize men and say they're using a cheap trick to breed by going on a killing spree and saving their sperm and having a friend or relative sell it after they die is ridiculous. It's not a cheap trick. Besides, women are delusional. Doesn't every MGTOW man already know that women don't see reality clearly? This is why husbands are called husbands, because they husband resources. They prevent the waste of resources that would occur if the women were in charge of the resources. Husbands dole out the resources as needed, and they don't let the wife waste a bunch of the resources. And so, considering this means that women cannot recognize what is good for them. This is why they're being promiscuous and they're having useless relationships that they either don't know or don't care are useless. This is why in the past there were arranged marriages. This is why fathers chose a man for their daughter or had to approve of who his daughter chose to marry, because he didn't want his daughter choosing her husband herself, because women cannot tell the difference between good guys and bad guys and cannot recognize the value of good guys. And this is because women are foolish, short-sighted, emotional, and amoral. So considering women cannot tell the difference between good guys and bad guys, and cannot appreciate the value of good guys, even if those women can tell the difference between good and bad guys. This means that just because women cannot recognize the value of a guy who goes on a spree before he goes on a spree, that does not mean that he's a worthless guy. Just because he's worthless in women's eyes doesn't mean he's actually worthless. So you see how Square.Peg is actually like saying these guys are losers on the basis of the fact that women don't want them, as if like women's opinion on which guys are valuable or not has any kind of relation to reality or not. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. I mean, that is so gynocentric of him to act like that. I mean, it's insane, right? Like, you know, after he goes on a spree, though, then he has proven his value. So why shouldn't he be able to breed? Because of being smart enough and principled enough to go on a spree, and being smart enough and foresightful enough to save his sperm beforehand. You see? He could be a really valuable guy, far smarter, far more faithful, far more loving, far more courageous than the average guy, right? Similarly, just because a guy is having sex with a lot of women, you know, some top guy, doesn't mean that he is not an absolutely worthless scumbag who should not be breeding. It's just that he's willing to lie to women. He's got charm and good looks, and he takes advantage of that. I mean, isn't good looks naturally a form of deceit? It implies that you're a good person. Maybe that's not the good-looking person's fault, but it still is a form of deception, and you should know that if you have good looks. Charm is also a form of deception. Most guys try to charm women. And as I stated in my video, at least most guys who have charisma, right? And as I stated in my video, charisma, honesty, and politeness, charisma is an amoral or evil quality. Honesty and charisma are anathema to each other. Those who speak honestly and accurately are usually not very charismatic because they concern themselves with truth, not with getting as much as they can get out of people by charming people. Charm is a hack. It's a lie. It's deception. And if anything, it's a blue-pilled and dishonest mating strategy. then it's using charisma. And if anything, I think I fucked up the sentence here. Let me try to figure out what I was saying here. Charm is a hack. It's a lie. It's deception. And if anything, charm is a blue-pilled and dishonest mating strategy, right? Using charisma to get women is definitely a blue-pilled dishonest mating strategy, right? Way more than, like, saving your sperm and then going on a spree, and then, having a friend sell that stuff to, so that you can have a kid after you're dead, right? And, so to say that, like, saving your sperm before going on a spree in order to have kids is a blue-pilled mating strategy is a ridiculous argument. And not only, I was not even saying that you should go on a spree to pass on your genes. I'm just saying the world's screwed up, so if you have a life that's worse than death, and you have no hope of bettering your situation, then you should go on a spree. And then considering that after you go on a spree, you're going to be famous after that, and a lot of women are probably going to fawn over you, like they do over Elliot Rodger, then why not have saved your genes? And why not pass on your genes? I mean, what's the downside? And because there will be more brave men, and it's a good thing because it'll make it so that there's more brave men in society, more smart men in society, right? Because someone who is smart enough to realize how badly he's getting screwed over by the system and who's brave enough to do something about it is someone who's infinitely better than the average sheeple. And therefore, the Elliot Rodgers, then C-Mog Doms, it's such a tragedy she didn't have kids, for real. The Elliot Rodgers, the Dylan Klebold's, the Brenton Tarrants, the Cariciuses, the Chos, these people, Cho Sung-Wei, these people should all be passing on their genes. And like I said, just because women have no interest in these guys doesn't mean that these guys are lacking in value. I mean, someone like Bill Gates, what if he had been born 200 years ago and there were no computers? And maybe like 500 years ago, little or no science, right? Would that have meant that he was worthless? Does that mean that women cannot? You see what I mean? Like, he probably would have been viewed as pretty, worthless in society, Bill Gates, if he had been born 500 years ago, right? So then it's like, women would not have recognized his value. But would that have meant that he's actually not valuable? Or does it just mean that women are idiots who can't recognize a man's value, right? All they can recognize is a man's bank account or his good looks. Aren't people like Square.Peg being very blue pill by implying that women's judgment of which men are valuable is accurate? I mean, women's judgment of which men are valuable is not accurate at all. So he's being extremely blue pill by implying that women's judgment is accurate. Such a viewpoint is totally ignorant of the fact that women are more foolish than men and cannot see reality properly. All red-pilled men should know better than to assume that women's judgments on who is valuable and who is not are valid. I mean, they don't even make accurate judgments about their own gender, much less about men, Square.Peg is actually being a blue pill simp by acting as if the standard for which men are valuable is women's determination of which men are valuable. And besides, the sexual marketplace is all screwed up by men like top 5% MGTOW men who have circles of, let's say, 2, 3, 4 fempets and therefore use up a huge percentage of men, right? Like, if you are the top 5% of men having 4 fempets each, that uses up 40% of women if they do it for their whole life. And it makes it difficult for bottom 80% of men to get women because, the bottom 10 to 30% of women are unfuckable. And so really, you got like the bottom, 90, 95% of men pursuing literally 30% of women or so, right? And a lot of these women have bad character or are obese. And so it's actually more like, 80% of men fighting over 5 to 10% of women. Or 95% of men fighting over 5 to 10% of women. And you wonder why there's gynocentrism. And so it says nothing bad about an incel if he can't get a girlfriend in today's fucked up American culture. So just because a guy goes on a spree because he cannot get access to women, that doesn't mean that his genes are not worth passing on. Anybody who has the aggression to go on a spree should be having kids because he has bravery unlike most men these days. Male cowardice is a root problem in society today. And every brave person who dies, like Terrence Crucius, is going to just make it so that there's fewer people in society who have the courage and the moral fortitude to actually oppose the tyranny that is rapidly advancing. So whatever it takes to not decrease the brave genes in society is a good thing. Such as men saving their sperms so that it can be sold to get women pregnant after those guys die after going on a spree. There's a reason Muslims are taking over Europe. Because Muslims have guts, they have courage, and they have principles. They have courage and they have principles. It's that simple. So they're winning. White men have no guts and no principles these days. So every man brave enough to go on a spree should absolutely be having kids because he's one of the very few in society who actually does still have some brave genes and is actually willing to do something about the tyranny. And that alone is reason enough why he should be passing on his genes. Square.Peg also says that if a guy does what I suggested, then he's going to be passing on his genes and then he won't be around to be a father. Well, most men are such cucks these days that they're willing to raise another man's kid anyway. So I don't think the woman is going to have any trouble finding a guy to take care of this next Crucius Terrant Manassian's kid that she got pregnant by because of buying his sperm online and then impregnating herself after his death or imprisonment. I don't think she's going to have a problem finding a father for that baby at all. Single mothers really are astonishingly able to find boyfriends these days. And why wouldn't they be? Because of the gynocentrism. There's such a shortage of women these days, or at least female libido, that even single mothers can easily find boyfriends. So I really don't think it's going to make it that hard for that kid to be raised by a father, for that kid's mom to find a boyfriend and marry a guy so that she can get her sperm bank babies taken care of, right? So you're not dooming the kid to being, raised without a father, not at all. Now, maybe you are raising the chances for the kid being abused by the father, because of the father being a stepfather, which have much higher rates of abuse. But still, I think it's worth it. Totally worth it. Because, cowardice is a root problem in society, and we have to fix that no matter what the cost. So, yeah. And even if she does, the kid grows up without a father, being raised by a single mother. Sure, that's not a good thing, but, without people like his father, and hopefully him too, without people like them pushing back, without brave people who are willing to use forcible exsanguination en masse on as many people as possible in order to stop the government's tyrannical psychopathy that everybody else is just letting happen, without people like him, the tyranny and the miscegenation will only increase. And so without brave people fighting back and destroying the government, the single motherhood is just going to increase anyway. So what's the difference? Not to mention the fact that, like I said, these kind of guys are smart and principled and brave. And so a guy like that being raised by a single mother probably would turn out a hell of a lot better being raised by a single mother than most guys today who are being raised by single mothers. You see? Because he's got good genes, because he's smart and he's brave. And number two, addressing his other point, Square.Peg's point, sprees increasing the number of cops and a crackdown on society. Well, regarding that, freedom has been declining for decades now. You could say since 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created. We're losing our freedom anyway. We're heading toward absolute tyranny anyway. And we weren't having a bunch of sprees like Alec and Elliot and Terrence and Crucius and Ogdom. That wasn't happening, 50 years ago, 70, 100 years ago, it wasn't happening. And we still, had tyranny back then. So, the tyranny's been advancing even without the sprees. So what's wrong with sprees if the tyranny's going to advance anyway, even without the sprees, So, you can't blame the decrease in freedom on sprees because the decrease in freedom started way before the sprees started. And if the sprees increase the speed at which freedom is lost, then that's a good thing because the faster people's freedom slips away, the more they're going to notice it, and then the more they're going to be likely to fight back. We're being boiled like a frog in a pot of water, like that story goes. The temperature is rising very, very slowly, so we're not noticing the slight increase in tyranny because it's so gradual and slow that we just let it happen. And then we finally wake up one day and we're totally enslaved. Eventually, 30 to 60 years from now, we'll realize we were utterly enslaved. So accelerationism is a good thing. It forces the elites to enslave you faster so that people notice and then push back. And if people don't push back, and they just let themselves be completely enslaved, well, then they deserve their enslavement. If you're not willing to fight for your own freedom, then you deserve to be enslaved, and you will be enslaved. So, trying to pin the increase in tyranny on the people who go on sprees is ridiculous. We're heading toward absolute tyranny anyway, and we have been for a long time. The petrodollar is 40 years old. They took us off the gold standard in the 70s. The Vietnam and World War II and I were started on false flags. Come on now. The tyranny's been going on forever. So, trying to pin it on sprees and people who do sprees is ridiculous. We've been heading this way for the last 90 to 100 years. So his argument is entirely invalid that it approaches the level of hilarious absurdity. And also on the increase in tyranny issue, it's so ridiculous because, okay, so they create more cops and all that. So what? That's going to cost them more money. And where does that money come from? Increased taxation, either covert or overt, which will piss off the public. And then they're going to start looking for red pill topics. They're going to start looking into red pill topics, the public will, because they're angry about increasing poverty because of the increasing inflation or the higher taxes. So by forcing the government to pay for more cops, by forcing the government to pay for more welfare, etc., you're forcing the government to raise taxes on the common people. And that will force the sheeple to wake up. And this will be good for freedom, not bad. And besides, what other option is there? Do nothing? We've been doing nothing for decades and it hasn't gotten better. It's only gotten worse. And so doing nothing is not a solution. And all men going MGTOW is not a solution either, because it will lead to civil war over the incel issue, because it only takes the top 25% of guys having 2 fuck buddies each for their whole lives to use up 100% of the women in society, thus turning 75% of guys into incels. Or just the top 10% of guys, the top 15% of guys having 3 fuck buddies for their whole entire life uses up 90% of the women in society. And the top 10, bottom 10% of women are unfuckable anyway. You see? So literally it takes very small percentage of men to use up all the women in society, turning a huge percentage of guys into incels, and thus leading to massive civil war over that issue. Square.Peg says that increasing the amount of children born to men like Crucius, Tarrant, Manassian, Klebold, etc. is bad, because it's going to make it so that we have a less moral society and this kind of thing. That's not true at all, because if it were such an easy thing, such an uncourageous thing to go on a spree, well then why do so few people do it? So few people do it because it is a difficult thing to do. It is a courageous thing to do. If it were so easy, then millions of people would be doing it. But hardly anybody does it because people like Manassian, Crucius, and Tarrant are the creme de la creme of men. They have principles and they have courage and they have the intelligence to see they're being screwed over and that the world is horrific and is heading toward a horrific future. These guys are smart, they're principled, they're brave, and if it wasn't the brave thing to do, everybody would be doing it. I mean, just look at the depression rate in the United States. I'm not talking economics, I'm talking emotional, psychological. You know, the amount of people on Prozac, Lexapro, etc. is insane. I can't remember what the number is, but it's huge. Maybe it's like a quarter or a third of the U.S. population that's on antidepressants or other psychiatric drugs. It's a huge percentage. So tons of people are living lives that are almost like living death. They would rather be dead. They just don't have the balls to kill themselves. Even killing yourself is not an easy thing to do. It's an incredibly hard thing to do. Like that suicide scene in that movie Cloud Atlas, where he talks about how incredibly difficult it is to kill yourself. Yeah, it's not an easy thing. Not easy at all. It's one of the hardest things in the world to do. Kill yourself. Much less go on a spree and then be at risk of being captured and have to spend the rest of your life in prison getting anally raped by other men. Taking that risk takes balls of steel. It takes massive courage. It's just so trite to act like, oh, that's just a cowardly thing to do. And as far as the issue of societal stability, sometimes things have to get worse for them to get better. You got to burn it all down before you can start again. So you have to make the oppression and suffering get worse before the elites can be dealt with, because otherwise the elites will just keep doing the slow kill, the soft kill on the public that they've been doing for decades now. You know, sometimes you need a huge, horrific tragedy to wake people up from their apathy and their disgusting, willful ignorance and callousness toward other people's suffering. Society doesn't get better without occasionally being shaken up by a really bad event like the Great Depression, which teaches people important moral lessons like frugality and compassion and things like that. And thus anything that happens in society that is bad, you can't say that it's bad except in massive retrospect, like 100 or 200 years later. Then you can look back and say, was that good or was that bad? But you can't look back right after or try to look at it beforehand and say, oh, this is going to have a bad effect over the next 10 to 20 years, and therefore it's bad. No, that's ridiculous, because sometimes things need to get worse before they can get better. And that's what happens at the end of an empire. So you can't blame people for doing things and then make society quote-unquote worse when society's tyranny in the first place has made it so that they need to do those horrible things at all, like sprees. So that's the way it is. Any increase in tyranny, poverty, or any other negative thing that results from people going on sprees, us living in more of a police state, for example, that's not the fault of a Crucius or a Tarrant. That's the fault of the government and the multinational corporations and the sheeple who tolerated things getting to this point. Blame the elites who rape with impunity and start wars that kill millions of innocent people and start civil wars in other countries just to get richer. These are the psychopaths who are to blame for the increase in tyranny and misery that results from people going on sprees. People going on sprees is the effect of tyranny. People going on sprees is not the cause of tyranny. And yeah, sure, the evil elites will use sprees to increase tyranny even further as an excuse to increase tyranny, but hey, if it wakes the sheeple up too, then it's up to the sheeple to fight back also. And that's where the importance of there being lots of brave genes in society comes in. Because, like I said, these guys would never be going on sprees if they had been born 200 years ago, back when society was still sane. Because there's no reason to go on a spree if you live in a sane society. These guys like Crucius and Manassian would never have killed themselves if they had been born 200 years ago, back when society was still virtuous, fair, free, prosperous, and patriarchal. A society full of guys like Crucius, Tarrant, Manassian, etc. would not be a society full of psychopaths being violent and committing suicide all the time or going on sprees all the time. No. It would be a functional, sane society because those guys are brave enough to hold the elites accountable so we can have a sane, fair, free, prosperous, virtuous society, and then those guys would not have to go on sprees. They would not have to commit suicide because they'd be living in a fair, sane, free, prosperous, peaceful, moral world because they have the courage to prevent that world from becoming tyrannical in the first place. If it weren't for tyranny, these people would not be going on sprees in the first place. So, you know, it's, oh God, what do you even have to say about it? I guess I'll stop it here. Maybe I'll break it up into 6 segments or something. It's such a long video, but this has been Redshift. Hopefully somebody got something out of this. More videos on this topic, on this rebuttal from the script coming up eventually. I don't know if they'll be released sequentially or whatever, but hopefully somebody liked this video. Hit the thumbs up if you liked it. Hit the thumbs down button if you hated it. Peace trucks.